One-sided limits from tables. While I have a graph here showing what this table looks like, I want you primarily to refer to the table itself on top. I got my x as well as my f of x, or the resulting y. And as you can see, 5 goes to 10, 4 goes to 8, 3 goes to 2, and so on and so forth. But what I'm looking at here is I'm actually looking at the limit as x approaching 1 from the left, as represented by the negative sign here, past the 1. Limit of x of 1 from the right, a two-sided limit, as well as when f equals 1. So what we're looking at here is actually different limit formulations. And what I'm going to look at here is number 1, as is approaching from the left. Here's 1, and this is the left side. And as you can see, it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.5. And then when x approaches 1, it looks like it's going to 10. But on the f of x, 8, 6, 4, 2, 1, it's approaching 0. Forget about this right here. Where's it approaching? This is going 8, 10, 8, 4, 2, 1. It is approaching 0 here. And as approaching from the left, it's infinitely close. And if you look at the graph right here, while the actual f at 1 equals 10 here, it's approaching 0 right there. So when we look at this, from the right side, I'm going to go up here again, negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, 0, 0.5. It is approaching 0 from the right as well. So f of x from the left is approaching 0. F of x from the right is approaching 0. Now, there's nothing here at x is 1 right here. So it does not exist. I've got to be approaching from both sides to be a two-sided limit, which this is what this is. But it does not exist. Now, not the limit, but the actual equation, f at 1 does equal 10 right here. Again, that's not a limit. Similarly, I got another table up here. I've got the graph, very similar to the previous one. As x approaches 0 from the left, and you can see it's going 5 to 5, 4 to 4, 3 to 3, 2 to 2, 1 to 1. It's just a simple linear equation. But 5, the f of x, 4, 3, 2, 1, it looks like it's approaching 0. And it is from the left. And it looks like this, negative 5, negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1. It's approaching 0. And I connect this here. It is approaching 0 from both sides. From the left, as x approaches 0, f of x approaches 0. From the right, as x approaches 0, f of x approaches 0. From the left and from the right. Now, as a two-sided limit, there's nothing there. So it does not exist. But as an equation, not a limit, but as an equation, when x is 0, f of x is 7, which is what this is right here. I've got a jump discontinuity here, very similar. But we're going to have two different approaches. And as I see here, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, as the x is 3, 2, 1, 0, negative 1. As x approaches negative 1 from the left, it approaches negative 1 right here. When it approaches negative 1 from the right, it approaches 1 right here. Now, it doesn't exist as a two-sided limit because it's not connected. And similar to my previous two slides here, the actual equation for f at negative 1 is 0. Right there. Now I got a different set of equations here. On the left, this is part of a parabola. and right here is the logarithmic function. However, don't worry about what type of functions are. I'm just trying to draw some lines to show limits here. And what I'm looking at here, as x approaches 4 from the left, it's approaching 5. And here is 4 from the left right here. And then f of x is 5. Here's 4. Here is 5. From the right, as x approaches 4 from the right, I've got 3 4s up here. So one's on the left, one's on the right, and one is added. So as x approaches 4 from the right here, from the right side, this is approaching 2. Now, as I said before, I don't have a two-sided limit here because they're not connected. So, does not exist as x approaches 4 because I don't know which one it would be. Would it be this one or would it be this one? So we don't know which one it is, so it does not exist. Now, as an equation, as f equals 4, right here, f of x also equals 4. So that is that right there. Again, not a limit, but an equation. Where do we see limits in the real world? I look at epidemiology, epidemics, pandemics, and when the AIDS virus first came out on an epidemic scale back in 1981, it was primarily found in sub-Saharan Africa, where unfortunately a majority of deaths have been. However, it also exploded in the United States during this time. So I'm going to go through how this happened and why we have these one-sided limits within epidemiology. HIV actually started when it made a jump from chimpanzees to humans. As many countries were colonizing / invading Africa in the 1880s, 1890s, including Belgium, the United States, Great Britain, Germany, they were not bringing their own food. They ate what food was local. They didn't bring their own chickens, their own cows, their own goats. So it really wasn't feasible. And they ate whatever was local, as most of us do in this world. And they called this bushmeat. One of the things they were eating was chimpanzees. Now, what happened is we didn't have the clean and antiseptic butchering, let alone surgical aspects in the 1880s, 1890s we do today. There are 8 different versions of SIV, simian immunodeficiency virus. And 6 of them are harmless to humans. 2 made the jump and turned in a human immunodeficiency virus, made a jump from the chimpanzees. And likely what happened was these butchers, as they're butchering these dead chimpanzees, they're probably cutting themselves and they get some blood in them. And they get infected. And if you notice, when they did the epidemiology, almost 100 years later, they were tracing what little blood samples they had from back then. The HIV spread going across the same areas where the rivers were, because that was the only mode of transportation back then. And what we're looking at here is that as people migrated further inward, they were carrying a sexually transmitted disease and passing it to others. And this was the HIV. Unfortunately, it really wasn't that well documented because 100 years ago, the average individual lived to only age 42. We didn't have the antibiotics, maybe 120 years ago, the antibiotics, proper surgical techniques, sanitation as we do today. So, as I've said before, 120, 130 years ago, people didn't live long enough to get Alzheimer's or have bad cholesterol building up to cause a heart attack or a stroke. There were other things. So this really wasn't paid attention to. What's it? And then from the 20s to the 60s, what was happening was as technology progressed, you notice now the HIV was spreading. And again, this is from post disease documentation and proving it was going along the railway line, again, where people are traveling. And in the 1960s, there was a significant number of individuals with HIV in the Congo. This is important because what happened next was there was a large cultural transition between Congo and Haiti in the 60s, 1963, 1971. This is important because 50 years ago, people could still be killed for being homosexual, and they hid it. And a lot of people would go to a safe haven for vacations for homosexuals, and that was in Haiti. Haiti didn't have any laws; they didn't frown upon it, and people felt comfortable there. Now, unfortunately, we also have the people from the Congo who are carrying HIV. The real insidious component of HIV is that you don't know you have it until about 10 years after you carry it. You can still give it to anyone else while you're carrying it, but you don't show any major symptoms until approximately 10 years later. So when people are going in the late 60s, early 70s from the United States into Haiti, right here, then they're going back home to their major cities, as you can see right here, and major cities throughout the United States. And 10 years later, 1980, 1981, this disease exploded. And it was a mystery at first because it was only homosexual men and IV drug users. So they knew it was bloodborne. But what was interesting from a medical standpoint was that there is no disease from HIV. But it compromises your immune system. It kills all your white blood cells. And they were seeing people that were dying along these two groups, male homosexuals as well as IV drug users, very similar to someone who just had radiation treatment for cancer, where you're um, very vulnerable to any kind of disease that would not affect a healthy person, but affects a person with white blood cells, such as Kaposi sarcoma, thrush, areas that a healthy human body can handle, but with no white blood cells, it will kill you. In the mid 60s to early 70s, and this is where we see a lot of these limits being used, and it's this quiet time for HIV, for instance, and they saw where it grew. In retrospect, they saw where it grew worldwide to about 5 million people, but then there were no one else infected. Then all of a sudden, after 10 years, it exploded in a matter of months. So what we have here is really a jump to continuity. And the problem is where, and epidemiologists are aware of this now, there are many diseases that they seem to grow, but then you don't see anything else for a while. And what is called the dormancy period. If you have the flu, someone coughs and you inhale those flu viruses, you may not know for 2 or 3 days. A cold, maybe 2 or 3 days. I think you might be able to carry chickenpox for almost a week before you start showing the symptoms of chickenpox. However, the problem was this dormancy is 10 years and they couldn't get much data. So they knew it was about 5 million people within the first 3 or 4 years, but then no real growth. And they did a time point, oh yeah, it's still staying. Then it all of a sudden exploded. That's because not enough people were diagnosed with it because they weren't showing symptoms. So why would they go to the doctor and get checked? So this is a prime example of where we see HIV using one-sided limits and jump discontinuities. Another example is the gypsy moth. The gypsy moth was actually bred in the United States. Silk is very expensive. It comes from silkworms, and it has to be manually pulled apart from the cocoon. Also comes from China, so that adds even more money when you're literally halfway around the world getting a fine type of thread. So a man by the name of Leopold Trouvelot thought, I'm going to make my millions of dollars. This is in the 1860s, late 1860s, early 1870s. And he brought some silkworms from China over and bred them with American moth, a gypsy moth. And he was trying to make an American version of the silkworm moth. Unfortunately, it did make some silk, but not to the level and not to the material quality that the actual full silkworm was. And then he had a greenhouse full of these for almost 10 years, and then a lot of them escaped. And unfortunately, what happens is this thing loves eating. Doesn't make much silk, but boy, it loves eating. It can destroy 100,000 acres within 3 years because they can eat almost anything, and they'll just eat all the leaves, which means no more chlorophyll and energy going back to the trees. So very invasive, and what happens after 3 years is there's no food left, and they die. But they've already destroyed the forest. Well, what happened? They discovered there's a braconid wasp. It's where the idea for Alien came from. The Aliens, the movie, they would inject their larvae, the eggs actually, onto the Japanese moth larva, and they'll eat its way inside. So controlling the Japanese, sorry, not Japanese, controlling the gypsy moth. And the more gypsy moth larvae there are, the more wasps there are going to be, more to eat. But when you look at this, you see the populations here. This blue here is the actual growth of the gypsy moth in millions of insects per hectare, with 100 acres by 100 acres. The dotted line is if there's no control. In other words, there were no braconid wasps. If they introduce braconid wasps, what you can see over 3 years, it goes down quite a bit. And then it levels off. And you reach a limit here. And you can see I got limit 2 years minus, which is 13.5 million. Right here. 3 years plus. On the plus side, it goes down to about, let me see right here. It goes down to about 5 million. So we got almost a jump discontinuity here. Not quite. It declines almost immediately. And then the interesting thing is you can see a secondary limit being created with the braconid wasp, which is the red line right here. As you can see, as this goes up, the braconid wasps go up. As this suddenly goes down because there's more eggs the braconid wasps are laying, their population goes down because they're killing all the gypsy moth larvae. And then as there's less gypsy moth larvae, there's going to be less braconid wasps to feed on. But you see, you get this limit approaching zero, but never quite. And this is called a maintenance phase right here. There's a minimum control. There's always going to be a few left from both sides, but it's controlled. It does not explode because it's got a predator now. Thomas Malthus developed the Malthusian theory of population. He says that while population grows exponentially, you may have 2 children, your children have 2 children, that's 4. All your 4 grandchildren have 2, and that's 8. Food does not grow. Food grows at a linear rate. And he said basically, this is the crisis right here. When the food, this moment here, when the abundance of food is outstripped by the population. Here's the first line right here is the population. This is the food, and this is the moment of crisis right there. And you see those types of limits in the real world. In the world, fish provides 70% of the world's meat consumption. And actually, I think 26% of the world's total food in general, for all, comes from fish. And unfortunately, our population was about 1 billion to about 1,600 worldwide. In 1920, it was 2 billion. 1963 billion. It is increasing at an incredible rate. We are almost at 8 billion now. So the problem's going to come in here with that the food's not increasing. In fact, the blue right here is, if you're watching Deadliest Catch, these are capture fisheries where they'll go out in the boat and capture them. It's not increased in the last probably 30 years because we are allowed to harvest up to 90% of the fish, but you need that 90%. So they'll lay lots of eggs and reproduce, but we've taken more than that. So they cannot keep increasing the level. So we have aquaculture farms, which are basically penned-in parts of the sea where like sharks cannot get into and dolphins not get into any enemies. This is what type of fish, and they feed them there. But if you look at this, half our total food population is being fed by aquaculture, artificial fish farms, because our natural population cannot increase anymore, just like Malthus said. And we got a limit here, basically. And that limit, as we exceed it, from the left side, look at this. The black line right here is human population. And in 16 years, we'll be at 8 billion. And our fish will be, from the left, it's going from the left, will be about 15 million. If we go up to 19 years, right here, you can see we've exceeded, there's more humans than food available for the fish. Again, these are jump discontinuities and they're one-sided limits. We don't know where it is right here. But these are one-sided limits. And we don't do something like this because we don't have the information, but we can predict where it's going to be. And this is where we use one-sided limits and often with tables in the real world.